Welcome everybody to this year's Olof Palme Memorial Peace Lecture, Leeds Olof Palme Memorial Peace Lecture. I'm David Webb. I'm going to chair this session, and I'm going to hand over in a moment to Councillor Lewis, who's going to say a few words, and then we'll have I'll introduce our speaker, Anthony Clavane. If I just say a little bit about the lecture was established in 1987 by Michael McGowan, who was then a Labour Euro MP for Leeds, and it was set up in memory of Olof Palme, the Swedish Prime Minister, who was a peace campaigner, an outspoken opponent of apartheid in South Africa. Unfortunately, he was murdered, assassinated, was to remember his work for peace, and some of the ideas he propagated, which were on the idea of common security, are actually coming back now as being something that Europeans in particular are considering more and more in their political kind of lives. So it's very relevant. Also, the subject of the talk, as you'll see, is pretty relevant as well for other reasons too. So let me first hand over to Councillor James Lewis, leader of Leeds City Council. This is a joint project which is set up between Leeds City Council Peace Links Group, Leeds Beckett University, and Yorkshire CND. So, Councillor Lewis, please, after you.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation to introduce the Olof Palme International Peace Lecture for 2021, which, as you've said, is supported by Leeds City Council and Leeds Beckett University. Normally, I've been pleased to welcome this event in Leeds Civic Hall, and obviously in the times we're in at the moment, we're doing it online today. I think it's important, first of all, to reflect on the memory of Olof Palme, who was an internationalist and a committed leader in solving conflicts and development. And when he was assassinated, the world lost somebody with a progressive views and imagination that at times we could sorely do with today. The lecture itself has a rich history over the years since Michael McGowan started it. Olof Palme's wife, Lisbeth, has spoken, as has actor Sir Patrick Stewart, politicians Claire Short and Caroline Lucas, Northern Ireland Nobel Prize laureate, the late John Hume, and also Senator George Mitchell, who chaired the crucial Northern Ireland peace talks. Leeds as a city has been a long-time supporter of peace and development. The council is a member of the UK and Ireland nuclear-free local authorities and Mayors for Peace. And earlier this year, we supported a resolution to support the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, joining 400 cities around the world in calling for that, and I was pleased to support that. We are a fair trade city, and every year we hold an annual event to mark Holocaust Memorial Day, Hiroshima and Nagasaki Day. And as leader, I'm committed that the council continue to support peace and development, and welcome the strong links with Leeds Beckett University and the university's commitment to peace studies, and also working on this lecture every year. Leeds is also a sporting city with Rugby League, Yorkshire County Cricket Club, and of course Leeds United Football Club. I'm really looking forward to hearing Anthony's talk and hear the links between Leeds United and peace and development. It's certainly something, thinking back to my trips to places like Millwall and West Ham, I'm certainly interested to hear how the two tie together. And I welcome everybody to this, people who support other football clubs. I believe there are some in the world, and people who support no football club but are interested in the issue. So thank you everybody for coming tonight, and enjoy Anthony's lecture.
Thank you very much. I think many of you will have seen the blurb that goes with the announcement of this lecture. Anthony Clavane is born in Leeds. He's a journalist. Well, he was a journalist for the Daily Mirror, sports journalist, and he's now a university lecturer at the University of Essex. So without further ado, I think, Anthony, it's over to you. Oh, I should just add one thing. There will be time for question and answers at the end. If you would like to ask a question, please link up to the Q&A box at the end of the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, you'll be able to enter a question, and we'll hopefully have time for a number of questions at the end. So, Anthony, thanks very much for joining us, and it's over to you now.
Thank you very much, Dave. Thanks very much, James. Yes, linking Leeds United to peace and development. I can remember getting a T-shirt sometime round about 1990, 91. And it had the smiley badge that I remember the Don Revie team had introduced in the mid-70s. And it was it said peace, love and united, and it was being used by Leeds United fans when they went to their sort of acid house raves, and it was generally seen as a turning point when we stopped being dirty Leeds and started to become a more sort of user-friendly Leeds. But of course, that's really what I'm going to be partly looking at today, is the kind of contradiction between an image that Leeds has had and still has to some extent, which is of being dirty Leeds, and the actual reinvention of Leeds, which tends to take place every 20 years, and to sort of link it up to obviously football itself, to the city, and yes, to the sort of international situation. Don't want to talk for too long. I'm sorry, I did have a PowerPoint, but it's failed me. So I will be just talking straight to camera, as it were. And I'll be delighted to talk afterwards and answer questions. It's a really hot evening, and I know that it would be lovely if we could all be outside in the pub having a pint talking about these kind of things. But instead, we're indoors watching television. And talking about watching television, I saw a great bit of Leeds art on the telly the other night. It wasn't John Atkinson Grimshaw, it wasn't a Jacob Kramer or Damien Hirst, it was an Irek Yazutovic. Now, Irek, you might or might not know, is a Leeds artist, or he's from Poland, but he's a Leeds fan, and he painted a mural of Marcelo Bielsa on the side of a building in Hyde Park Corner, which you might have seen, you might have passed. It's always being shown on television whenever there's something about Leeds United on. It's this sort of homage to Bielsa. And even though it might not be your thing, I know it's an unusual sort of subject. When we thought about the topic, I mean, I know in the past that we've had very distinguished people talking about very distinguished things in international politics, and particularly in relation to peace. But I actually think that even if you don't like football, you can't deny that it's woven into the sort of cultural fabric of society. Football helps shape lives and cities, nations and the world. I mean, at the moment, I imagine quite a few of us are watching Euro 2020, and if anything was a sort of rebuke to the sort of Little England petty nationalism that fed the whole sort of Brexit debate, it's Euro 2020, because it shows that football crosses national boundaries. And has a direct way of getting societies to tell stories about themselves, and to other countries. As a journalist, I spent a lot of time traveling the world, going to international competitions like World Cups and Euros. Yes, it was a hard job. Somebody had to do it. But I always used to think that whenever I got there, whether it was in Portugal or Germany, Paris, it was an opportunity or Japan or Korea, it was an opportunity for that country to tell a story about itself to the world. And in a way, although a lot of the games are being played across Europe. In fact, this is the first tournament, Euro 2020, to be played at venues all across Europe. It's also, a lot of it will be at Wembley, the final stages, and it will be England telling a story about England, Scotland, if they get through to that stage, telling a story about Scotland, Wales, and so on. And I think Gareth Southgate, before I talk about Bielsa, but I just wanted to talk about Gareth Southgate, who actually lives in Harrogate. He wrote a very good letter, an open letter to England fan recently, talking about how things are much bigger than football. And I think that he believes in taking a stand, or, you know, in his player's case, taking the knee against racism. And he's been very eloquent on this for some years now. And he is part of his side, anyway, is part of this kind of exciting young multi-ethnic, diverse Britain. And I think that's what I take out of football at the moment. I also think it's a, you know, and what I'm going to argue as well is that I think the way Bielsa approaches football is an antidote to the destructive divisiveness and in fact some of the virulent forms of nationalism that have appeared over the past few years. But the talk is about Bielsa reinventing Leeds. It's about him reinventing, to a certain extent, helping to reshape Leeds as a city. And I think the connection between the club and the city, which is why it's great to have Councillor Lewis here, I think you know, he can talk to that more than me. But I think my argument is, and I wrote a book called Promised Land some years ago. It was all about Leeds United and the city and the communities in Leeds. And I tended to think that when Leeds United were doing well, the city tended to do well, and the communities in Leeds tended to do well, particularly the community I come from, the Jewish community in Leeds, and immigrant communities who've contributed so much to Leeds over the years. But there have been terrible moments over the last 60 years, and I'm going to talk a bit about that, when the city's gone into decline, the club has gone into decline, and there's been, you know, racism and so on. I mean, I think back to the 1980s, for example, as a pretty dire decade. And I think what we've been going through up until the last few years as well, with the divisiveness of Brexit and so on. But now the club has returned to the promised land, and the city is also on the upturn as well. And I think that this is a great sort of interrelationship between club and city, and it does a lot, whether you're into football or not. I mean, it does a lot for Leeds as a city. Leeds is a city which has, as I said, a different image according to where you stand. If you are a non-Leeds fan, you might well still believe the myth of dirty Leeds, which is a myth that grew up during the Don Revie era of the 1960s and 70s. And Leeds have never really been able to shake off that tag. I don't think it was particularly fair in the last 5 years of Don Revie's reign. In the 1970s, Leeds played some of the most beautiful football, I think, that English football has ever seen. But there's no doubt that it had a reputation for having a very hard, cynical attitude, and, you know, has never quite shed that image. And the same with the city. Ever since Charles Dickens wrote about Leeds as a beastly place in the 19th century, obviously industrial towns and cities all over England were being called beastly and dirty, but often by writers who had travelled from the south, and they didn't like the Industrial Revolution, and they didn't like the way that it was affecting society. But Leeds has tried to reinvent itself, to shrug off its industrial past ever since really the 1960s. Don Revie was the first to try and reinvent Leeds. He introduced an all-white strip to the team when they were in the second division, which is quite cheeky really, because Real Madrid played in the all-white, and Real Madrid had just won 5 European Cups. And, you know, Don Revie had an ambition, an aspiration to fulfill the potential of Leeds, the club. And I think that, you know, throughout history, whether it's football managers like Revie or Howard Wilkinson, and lately, of course, Bielsa, there's been an aspirational, ambitious side to Leeds at the city and the club. There's also been, of course, the parochial side, the inward-looking, introspective side, particularly in the 1980s. But we've had, up until the emergence of the Messiah, or Marcelo Bielsa, as he's more commonly known, we've had a terrible period up until really 3 years ago, when since 2004 anyway, Leeds were out of the Premier League. And for a city that's as big as Leeds, 770,000 if you take the greater Leeds area, one club city, it's astonishing underperformance, underachievement. And when he arrived 3 years ago, Marcelo Bielsa introduced things, which I'll talk about in a minute, which reinvented Leeds. And this is why he's ended up with murals like there's another one created by Nicholas Dixon, which is Bielsa the Redeemer, which shows the Bielsa in the post of Christ the Redeemer, which overlooks Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And this is because he's developed a cult following in Leeds. He is an obsessive, eccentric footballing genius. He's turned our world, that's the Leeds United fans' world, upside down. He's also turned the city's world upside down. And wherever you go now and you talk about Leeds, you'll hear the name Bielsa mentioned. And I guarantee that's around the world. It's because he himself has made his name. He's from Argentina, but he's been manager of Argentina, manager of Chile, manager of many clubs, but he's renowned for a certain version of football, which is an exhilarating, high-pressing, energetic passing game that takes no prisoners in its adventurous, swashbuckling approach to football. And this is how, as a team, we've been reinvented. And yet, he is, despite all this, despite the reverence, despite being a cult figure in Leeds, worshipped by the best coaches in the world like Pep Guardiola, Pochettino, Zidane, he's a very humble man. And it's not an affectation, it's not false modesty. I remember when Leeds won promotion to the Premier League, astonishing moment. And, you know, at the end of last season, well, it was the end of the previous season, because it's almost like hard to believe that we finished that last season. It wasn't last season, that was our first in the Premier League, but the season before. And Leeds had confirmed their promotion. They romped to the becoming champions of the Championship. And he emerged from his small flat that he rents above a sweet shop in Wetherby, and he bumped elbows with children and apologised for his English. "You are God," one admirer shouted, and Bielsa wagged his finger at him and said, "No, no, no." He is genuinely a humble man who doesn't believe in the trappings of fame, celebrity, or power. In many ways, he's created, I would argue, a new mindset at Leeds. It's a new way of appreciating this game, this beautiful game. It's not just a new attitude to football and sport, but it's a new attitude to life itself, which I will explain shortly. So he's secured his place. Let's just say that. He secured his place as one of the legendary managers, along with Don Revie, who was manager of that great Leeds side of the 60s and 70s, and Howard Wilkinson, who was the manager when Leeds won the league, the last team to do that before it became the Premier League in 1992. And he, in the 100 years that the Leeds United has been in existence, I think he's certainly in the top 3 managers. I'm hoping he'll go on to become the most successful, because in my view, he's the most influential coach in the 21st century. In a way, we are very lucky to have him. Obviously, before we had him, we had to go through 16 odd years of absolute hell, of pain, of misery, of relegation to the 2nd and the 3rd division, of Ken Bates, of administration, of points deductions, you know, everything from Peter Ridsdale's Goldfish through to the mad world of Cellino. But we've seen that chapter. We've finished that chapter. We've turned our back in the wilderness. We are entering the promised land. So he's reinvented Leeds. I think that Leeds, you know, were a byword for underachievement, and that's really what I'm trying to talk about. Because even before Revy, you know, in its first 50 years, Leeds founded, you know, in 1919. Leeds didn't really do anything for the first 40 or 50 years, given the size of the club. You know, you think of big cities like Liverpool and Manchester, Newcastle, Birmingham. The clubs in their big cities did well. Leeds didn't win anything apart from, I think, a second division title. They didn't really win a single major trophy though. And then of course came the Revy revolution. But you know, even though Leeds started to do things, they still were underachieving. They should have won more under Revy. They reached so many finals, they lost. They always seem to, you know, come up short. They won the league twice. They won the FA Cup. They won the League Cup. They won a couple of European trophies, but they should have won twice or three times as many trophies. The Liverpool team that followed that Leeds team were dominant in the way Leeds were, but they won things. The Alex Ferguson Manchester United team, equally in the 90s and noughties, dominant. Arsene Wenger's Arsenal. So I think that in the end, what we're looking at is that, you know, it's all about fulfilling potential. And this is interesting, is that Bielsa believes in every player fulfilling their potential. He has taken players who were considered to be middling, you know, championship players and transformed them into internationals. The most recent example, of course, is Calvin Phillips, the lad from Wortley who actually was man of the match against Croatia and is now being presented as a kind of the new hope for England. But it was Bielsa who took him under his wing, made him also his personal project and his protege. I think when we talk about reinventing Leeds, the image of Leeds as being a bunch of cheats, like, you know, we always see that Brian Clough clip from the Damned United, you know, you've won all your medals by cheating, throw them in the bin. If it wasn't so hot, I would do my Brian Clough impersonation, but I don't think I will, unless I get a request later. But this is the image, because who else has a film made about them which is successful, where Leeds is presented as a dirty, cheating team? I'm not saying the image was true, but it was an image, it was a myth, and it stuck. He's reinvented Leeds because he's introduced fair play, if you like, in that now when you think about Bielsa's Leeds, you think about fair play. He received a FIFA Fair Play Award. Do you remember that time? If you are football fans or Leeds fans, you will, I'm sure, but it was unprecedented when he ordered his team to concede a goal to Aston Villa because Leeds had scored after playing on after an injury. So it's this idea of fair play. I mean, you know, Jamie Carragher, loads of people are pundits who don't normally like Leeds, Gary Neville, everyone's queuing up to say how much they love this new Leeds. And, you know, I think now, for the first time in their lives, in the last couple of years, Leeds have become everyone's second team. So no one would have thought this was credible before Bielsa. He also has this image of sitting on his stool or his bucket. There's a mystique, there's eccentricity, there's a quirkiness about him. There's also the braininess. I think I would argue that he's introduced a sort of cerebral type of socialist football that believes in collective rather than individual teamwork. And he's got one of the sharpest tactical brains. He kind of comes over more like an eccentric Oxbridge Don than, say, you know, Sam Allardyce clone. He comes, and this is unique in the world of football. He is from a family of lawyers and architects and diplomats and principled politicians. This is why I thought he was kind of suitable for a personality like his to have, you know, this sense of internationalism. I am, after all, addressing an internationalist event. You know, he's ever since he sort of left Argentina. I mean, his grandfather was on the Argentine Supreme Court and was a professor of law. His father was an eminent lawyer. So was his brother. His brother, in fact, was the Argentine foreign secretary who held talks with Jack Straw over normalizing relations with the Falklands, and is, I think, still now Argentina's ambassador in Chile. His sister's a renowned architect. So that's the kind of family he's from. And yet, as I said, he lives very humbly. Somebody once said he doesn't believe in enjoying the usual pleasures. He just needs 2 bedrooms, a living room, a good bathroom, lives above a sweet shop, goes to Costa in Wetherby, wears his Marcelo Bielsa tracksuit. He's kind of not into cars, not into watches, clothing. He's kind of old school in that sense. He's also an outsider. And I think that's another way, wherever he's been throughout his career, whether it's Newell's Old Boys, managing Argentina, Chile, Marseille, Atletico Bilbao, and so on, he's reveled in the outsider status. It's always us against the world, and in a way that feeds into that Leeds thing. In a way, Leeds has always, as a city and a club, has always seen itself as being us against the world. But the most important thing, in a way, apart from the manner in which he's done it, is the fact that he has brought success to Leeds. You know, Leeds has gone so long. This is a city, the biggest city in Europe, has to have gone so long without a top-tier football club. No other city of the size of Leeds has gone so long without being in the top flight. And in the 3 years he's been here, he's transformed them into, you know, from a laughingstock really into champions. I was kind of tongue-in-cheek calling him the Messiah and Christ the Redeemer and God, but you know, he has molded the team in his own image. And we'll come on to what that means in a minute. So he's reinvented Leeds United. He's also brought international recognition and hopefully international success to Leeds. And I think, you know, he's put Leeds back on the map. He's one of the most talked about managers in the world. He was shortlisted, unbelievably, you know, one of the 3 on the shortlist for FIFA Coach of the Year. This is after taking Leeds from the Championship to the Premier League, again, unheard of. I think he enjoys a global admiration that's unmatched by any other coach. Now, I said at the beginning, I'm talking about not just the club, but the city. And I think just like the club, over the years, you know, over the last 100 years, as I wrote in Promised Land, my book about Leeds, the city and the club, Leeds has always tried to reinvent itself, to kind of rebrand itself, and often it's failed. And I'm hoping now that this reinvention, this reinvigoration, this revitalization of Leeds that's happening at the moment, you know, I think it will stick. I've got faith. I'm an optimist. I'm a glass half full kind of person. But let's just look back as well, briefly, at how over the past, you know, 60 years, certainly it's reinvented itself since the Second World War. I mean, you could argue that in the 60s and 70s, it was one of these brave new cities that was emerging from the crumbling wreck of post-industrial Britain. Obviously, it wasn't just happening in Leeds, but Leeds called itself and rebranded itself as the motorway city. Again, it might not be the most appealing thing to a contemporary audience, but that was considered to be futuristic. We have seen the future. We will build, you know, towers. We'll build houses in flats in the skies. We will build motorways. We'll be at the end of the M1. That kind of came to nothing in the end because of what happened in the 70s, the depression, the recession, the 1980s particularly was a terrible time. But then in the 90s, Leeds came again, the Barcelona of the North, reinventing itself with, you know, like Manchester. It wasn't just Leeds, but it was, you know, becoming a 24-hour city, and loads of, you know, we all know the story, I'm sure, Harvey Nichols moving to Leeds, Leeds becoming the financial centre outside London, the main one. Lots of companies moving their northern headquarters to Leeds. And then we had the Northern Powerhouse, which it was part of. And again, I think Motorway City, Barcelona of the North, Northern Powerhouse have all not fulfilled the potential that we wanted. But we're hoping with the Leeds 2023 that this great metropolis again will defy the odds with its year-long festival of culture that's coming up. And I think Leeds is on the up again. We've been through obviously a terrible time, as everyone has, with COVID, with the lockdown. But when we get out of this, we're going to be ready for this year-long cultural celebration. I just want to quote Ruth Pitt, who's the chair of the Leeds 2023 Trust, who said, "Anyone who doesn't associate sport with forms of culture is missing a trick. Leeds has now a Premier League club that puts it on the global map and a festival of culture to aid recovery." So recovery isn't just about getting the economy going. In fact, you kind of trigger that revival of the local economy, partly through culture and also through football. And this is seen, you know, throughout the country when you've had City of Culture. I mean, Hull certainly benefited, in my view, from being City of Culture. Liverpool did as well. But just because we left the European Union, a terrible decision in my view, but just because the EU then said a British city couldn't become the European capital of culture due to that small matter of Brexit, it doesn't mean we can't assume that title anyway, which I think is a very Leeds thing to do. We are the third biggest city in the UK, population's around 750,000, yet we have been punching below our weight for several decades. And what I'd say is, finally, that Marcelo Bielsa obviously hasn't directly, unlike, say, Councillor Lewis, been in charge of the city. But I think by his example, by the kind of person he is, by his emphasis on so many things that are important in life, which are to do with the way you look after yourself, nutrition, your body, the way you look after other people, the way you challenge injustice, the way you put 100% into everything, the way that you serve your fans, you know, you connect yourself to your fans. In his new mindset, his new culture, a new way of appreciating the game, as well as a fantastic brand of football that's exciting and has made Leeds into a very prominent club and city again, I think he has contributed to helping to transform this perennially underachieving city and club and delivering us from the wilderness into the promised land. So that is my thesis on Bielsa. I have now finished the talk, and I don't know, Dave, or should we go over to you?
Well, thank you, thank you very much, Anthony. That was really interesting. I'm not particularly a football follower myself, but you certainly taught me a lot. We'll just see if any questions come in. Don't forget, people viewing, you can put a question into the Q box at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll put that to Anthony. I just wondered whether you thought, you know, at this time when politicians are not treated, well, they're treated with some suspicion, really. People think they can't believe anything they say, you know, they're lying, being accused of lying, being found out of lying, whether Marcelo Bielsa might be able to teach them something. Do you think he should become manager of sort of, you know, Parliament or something like that? Is there something we can pass on?
Well, you know, I know you're slightly tongue-in-cheek there, but I think you've got a good point, Dave. By the way, you might not know or be into football, but your namesake was responsible for me crying in 1970, part of that Chelsea team that beat Leeds United in the FA Cup final. So whenever I see the name Dave Webb, I get worried. But seriously, it's interesting. Marcelo Bielsa would, to me, be a perfect prime minister of this country, apart from the fact that he's from Argentina. But that's interesting in itself, isn't it? I mean, you know, as I said earlier, you know, I think his brother is or has been foreign secretary in Argentina. He's a very political person. It's clear to me he's on the left in politics, but he obviously can't keep you know, raising his head above the parapet and saying what he thinks. But everything that he says speaks to an idea of fairness and equality, justice, and so on. And actually, Dave, you know, over the last year, when politicians, last few years, when politicians have been repeatedly called out for being liars and corrupt and so on, like footballers like Marcus Rashford, you know, it's been people like that who've taken action, and Raheem Sterling, and they've led the way. You know, Marcus Rashford has led the way in terms of, you know, school meals, free school meals for children who live in impoverished situations. Raheem Sterling, anti-racism, and you know, Gareth Southgate even now, I think, you know, coming out and making a stand in terms of taking the knee, and Bielsa as well. He's from that kind of new, you know, conscientious, socially aware, feeling responsible kind of breed of football person. And I think, you know, in all seriousness, you know, if he stood as an MP, I would vote for him, and I trust him in. I mean, I can't think of anyone else who I trust more. And you know, he is enigmatic. We don't know everything about his life, but the players, you know, what do they think? What do they say? Well, he doesn't try and befriend them. They have respect for him. I mean, he's a bit old school, really. I'd say he's a sort of, I would say he's a bit like, he's a bit old Labour, a bit old-fashioned socialist. But, you know, he has a huge respect from his players, from the fans, all the clubs that he's been at, apart from the ones where he's left after a few days.
It's great to hear of you know, footballers becoming figures in that respect. I mean, that's quite an amazing kind of change around, as you've already pointed out. We have got some questions here now coming in. Colin Archer says, fascinating talk. What about the post-Bielsa period? He does seem to move on. Can the club and the city maintain this positive surge? Good question.
Well, you know, and also I did see, just to tie in with that, Michelle Sorkin has also said, do you think Bielsa will be tempted to move to one of the top 5 clubs in the UK if asked? I'm going to put my, you know, I haven't really been talking in the sense of a football pundit or football person, because I just like to think of the wider significance. But I have, you know, I was a football reporter on a national newspaper for many years. I do not think he will be tempted to move to one of the top 5 clubs in the UK if asked, Michelle. And I think, you know, I don't think he will move on. What about the post-Bielsa age? Well, he is in his mid-60s. He can't go on forever. Although I remember that Alex Ferguson kept going on, didn't he, into, you know, his late 60s. But what I think is interesting is, I think Michelle says, you know, will he be tempted to move to one of the top 5 clubs? Okay, I'm going to be wildly optimistic and say I think Leeds will become one of the top 5 clubs in the next few years under Bielsa. Why should you leave? His personal project is to transform not just the club, but the city, the culture. That's what gives him his kicks, not necessarily winning things. Hopefully we'll win things. But I just think he loves it in Leeds because he's so respected and admired. He falls in love with cities. He's done this throughout his life. He's seen something in Leeds, something of the character of Leeds, which, you know, which we could go into in another kind of time. But, you know, there is a spirit, a character about being Leeds, which he identifies with. I think he's very happy at Leeds. He's only halfway through his plan. He's got us up into the Premier League. I would reckon in the next few years he'll get us up into the top 5.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll all remember that prediction and get back to you on that. A question from Steve Smith. Could you expand on Bielsa's approach in relation to socialism? I recall the story of him getting the players pick litter at Thorpe Arch when he first arrived.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, that's to expand on the socialism. Look, I'm maybe idealizing him, because, you know, this is where my politics are, and I would like to say that, I mean, Jurgen Klopp at Liverpool, I would argue, is certainly left of centre, you know, and I think we know over the years, Brian Clough, you know, was a big Labour supporter. Howard Wilkinson supported the miners. Jack Charlton supported the miners, Labour supporter. So I think Bielsa is from that tradition. But yes, when he came to Leeds, the first thing he did was he got the players to pick the litter up, as Steve says, to go around the Thorpe Arch training ground. Why did he do that? Well, I think they spent 3 hours doing that. And he said, look, what you've just done is you've shown that by picking the litter up, you kind of are connected to your base, your fan base. You know, think of the people who pick the litter up. Think of the people who provide the services in the city. Think of the people who do the work. You know, they pay their good wages, their good salaries to come and see you every week. And they do it by doing these kind of things. It's a very similar thing to what Howard Wilkinson did when he was at Leeds. He took Leeds United players down the mines when there were still mines, before Margaret Thatcher shut them all. But he took them down the mines to say, look, this is how, you know, your fans, your base, your supporters live their lives. Some of them, obviously, not all of them. And I think that was where his socialism comes from. But the other thing is, when the Super League was mooted recently, he wasn't the only one, but he took up a very, I thought Leeds took up a great position against it, attacking the idea of this kind of greedy capitalist racket. And he'd said that when you have to stand up to the mighty, the powerful, and in a way, because Leeds are, you know, still a team with players who are being paid like they were, well, they were in the Championship. They've got the kind of salary, in terms of salaries, they're way down the league in terms of the highest paid players. And they've also got mainly players who came from the lower leagues or came from, you know, clubs for low fees, apart from one or two expensive signings. If he can succeed at Leeds, he will challenge the money-obsessed, greedy billionaires who run football. The top five that Michelle identified at the moment are the richest five in the country. If a club like Leeds, or indeed Leicester City is another good example, can challenge that, that's good for football, because it kind of is a way of redressing the balance of allowing a kind of, you know, almost a cartel of clubs to kind of, you know, this top six who wanted to form a European Super League, who think they can get away with anything. He represents the many, not the few.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a similar kind of question here from Jonathan Long, who says, yes, Leeds United are back in the Premiership, but only mid-table despite this great coach. So is that about what we should expect for the city in the top flight, but not at the top? You may have already addressed this, but when do you think the Championship will actually be theirs then? Yeah,
I mean, in a way, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day. I mean, give him a break. You know, he's been there 3 years. In his first year, he got them to the brink of the Premier League. In his second year, they won the Championship. This is his third season, and he's defied all the odds with a team that has finished mid-table when any newly promoted side normally just hopes to finish fourth from bottom. Sheffield United did differently to that, I agree. But on the whole, you know, it's take it in stages. And in fact, Jonathan, if we try and do everything, we try to run before we can walk. Remember the last time that happened with Peter Ridsdale's Leeds, we crashed and burned because Leeds and Peter Ridsdale's Leeds, you know, they went mad and they started throwing money around and borrowing lots of money, and then ended up crashing and burning and going down the league, selling all their players, getting relegated, administration, points deductions. So we need to take it in phases, take it steady, step by step. The next step, go from mid-table to hopefully maybe 7th or 8th, then hopefully in the top 6, then hopefully, and do it year on year, improvement.
Okay, great, thank you. And an anonymous attendee says, what is the psychological impact that Bielsa has on a city like Leeds? Do supporters adopt his beliefs and values?
Well, that's again, it's such a good question, and you know, I think there's a really interesting question here. Leeds United supporters, you know, they're not this sort of homogenous block of people who all vote Brexit or all in favour of the European Union, who are left wing or right wing. They're a mixture. They're quite a diverse bunch. In the past, let's face it, and I think Councillor Lewis sort of alluded to this when he said, you know, going to Millwall and West Ham. I mean, we had a reputation, the fan base, for not being a pleasant fan base. Let's put it like that. In fact, in the 80s, well, 70s and 80s, and to a certain extent, the beginning of the 90s, there was a lot of, you know, violence and nastiness, racism, you know, but I think Leeds turned away from that, managed to, you know, they fought off the fascists, you know, kicked the National Front out of Elland Road. There was campaigns, you know, anti-racist campaigns. But I think the supporter base in recent years has nothing to do, well, has very little to do with that era. And again, even in that era, I think it was very mixed. So it's still, though, representing, you know, a city which was very, let's look at this, very divided in Brexit. I mean, it was more or less 50-50, wasn't it? I mean, I think narrowly voted for Remain. But, you know, in the Leeds supporter base, there are unpleasant types, there are amazing, compassionate, progressive types. I actually do think that, I'll give one example. Can you imagine Leeds United fans accepting at any time in their history their team to concede a goal to another club? Only Marcelo Bielsa could get them to do that. How extraordinary, against Aston Villa. And, you know, in a way, I was watching that thinking, why are you doing this? He told them all to stand still like statues and let Aston Villa score a free goal because Leeds had played on, you know, when an Aston Villa player who was diving to waste time anyway, was pretending to be injured. No, he probably was injured. I don't know. And Click scored a goal. And to do that, what other manager would be allowed to do that? Because Leeds fans are, you know, to a certain extent, being kind of educated, if that's the right way of putting it. I certainly felt educated by what he did. I was astonished by that. He's a man of principle, of integrity. You know, it's hard in this kind of modern footballing world to talk about these things, you know, because you always think, well, you know, he's being paid a lot of money. That's very true. You know, footballers are disconnected from the supporters. But I think as far as you can expect any Leeds manager to do it, he's done it. Leeds fans respect him. And yes, you know, if he makes a stand and says things, I think they will listen. And I didn't like the way that, for example, Leeds fans piled onto a female football pundit, Karen Carney. You know, I would have liked Bielsa to have come out and condemned that a bit more. You know, I didn't like, for example, that Kiko Casilla, the Leeds goalkeeper, played in Leeds games after, although he denied it, after he was found guilty of using racist language. So I think if Bielsa took a stand on these kind of things, I think Leeds fans would listen.
Yeah, very interesting. Do you know of any other occasion where a manager has just sort of said, you know, let them score a goal?
No, the only other occasion, and you know, it's virtually unprecedented in world football. But I do remember Arsenal Sheffield United in the FA Cup in the late 90s or early 2000s. Similar thing happened. Arsenal scored a goal when they should have kicked it back to the other team, and they won the game. Arsene Wenger, the manager, after the game said, we have to replay this game because we won it through an unfair way. So he didn't order his team to let a goal in, but he said, we have to have a rematch. So maybe Wenger is the only other manager to do something similar, but I can't think of anyone else. Unless anybody knows of that, then I'd be interested to know and find out.
Please let us know if you know. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing to happen. Okay, Sean Morris says, why has the issue of footballers taking the knee become so contentious? Can it help reduce the awful problem of racism in sport and society?
Well, it's a necessary but not sufficient thing to do in order to stop help to stop racism. Of course, it will not stop racism, and nobody's pretending. What needs to happen is, loads of other things need to happen where, particularly racist abuse and social media is clamped down on, and I can give you loads of examples. But what I will say is this: when young black players take the knee, and are doing it because obviously it's a symbol of anti-racism, it's because they have been racially abused, it's because they have been attacked on social media, maybe even have, worse than that, and a lot of them have talked about that. So to show solidarity with the young black players who take the knee, everyone should take the knee, all players should take the knee, but more importantly, the fans should respect it. And the fact that a small minority of England fans are booing is a disgrace. And the fact that they're booing shows the need to take the knee, because obviously there is still a small minority, and there's always been a small minority of England fans, just like a small minority of Leeds fans, who have not been the most tolerant of people, have actually been quite bigoted. But let the silent majority come forward and support the players, and it won't stop racism, but it will help to raise awareness of the issue, and it starts a conversation which is badly needed. But you really do need to have action rather than gestures. I'm not saying the gestures are wrong. The gesture is correct, but you need more than just a gesture.
Yeah, thank you. It sounds like Philip Goldstone has put in a comment, Robbie Fowler penalty incident. I think that must refer to kind of gestures of fair play. Do you know anything about that?
Well, the thing is he referring to the fact that when Robbie Fowler penalty incident? I know there's an incident with Robbie Fowler and Graham Lasso when he was implying that Graham Lasso was gay. But what Robbie Fowler penalty is? Oh yes, I know what it was. Robbie Fowler, good point. Yeah, Robbie Fowler, when a penalty had been given to Robbie Fowler when he played for Liverpool, it wasn't a penalty. Robbie Fowler knew it wasn't a penalty. So do you know what he did? Instead of taking the penalty and trying to score, he tapped it softly to the goalkeeper. He kicked it to the goalkeeper. So that kind of fair play, integrity is the kind of thing that Bielsa would approve of. And yes, it's not the same as saying everybody stand still and let the other team score a goal, but it's a great example of sportsmanship by Robbie Fowler. So thank you for that. Good point.
Yeah, Philip says that's you've got the one. That's the one. Yeah. So Chris Swindles asks, to what extent do you think the owner of the club can be given credit for the resurgence of the club, not least in appointing Bielsa, but also taking a long-term approach to the development of the club?
Well, you know what? It's been a perfect storm, hasn't it? I mean, I talked about a perfect storm in terms of the club doing well and the city doing well. I'm a bit like this. I always think these things come in threes or fours. It's like number, you're waiting for the number 18 bus, and then they all three come along at once after you. What's come along at once is a great manager, a great owner, and I think, as I said, the revival of the city. The owner is great, partly because the owner is not Ken Bates, it's not part of the Peter Ridsdale era, is not Cellino, is not even, there was this awful, every owner, I'm sorry about this, I've got to be careful what I say, so I better not say anything that, we can get into trouble for, but let's just put it like this. We've had very bad owners since the early 2000s. And it's a breath of fresh air that we've got an owner who, A, could get a genius like Bielsa to come to Leeds to persuade him, and as I think Chris has alluded to, has a long-term approach, which means, you know, the youth system, the academy system, a lot goes into that. I mean, we won the division for the was it the under 23s? I think that's this season. We've got a great crop of young players, and in fact, it's a throwback to the era of you know, Leslie Silver, Howard Wilkinson, when Leeds had a good owner, Leslie Silver, and they won the league. And Howard Wilkinson had a 10-year plan, a long-term approach, 10 years, not let's do it tomorrow. And you know, that plan meant building up the academy, which became Thorpe Arch Academy, bringing so many great young Leeds players through. We had to sell them all in the end. You know, James Milner, Aaron Lennon, and Alex Mowat, all of them in the end had to go. But we've got another great crop of youngsters. So yeah, long-termism is back in fashion at Leeds. It's a perfect storm. Great owner, great manager, great team, great fans, great city. I'm feeling very optimistic this evening.
That's good. It's good to feel optimistic. In fact, that's another connection we have with this talk, because one of the partners of this talk is Leeds Beckett University, which used to be Leeds Metropolitan University, and Leslie Silver was actually a Chancellor of Leeds Metropolitan University for a few years. So there's another connection there.
He was a great man, and also, by the way, Leslie Silver himself was a socialist and a Labour Party supporter all his life, just as a matter of interest.
Right. And Jonathan Long has a question. As you probably know, Leeds is a year of culture in 2023. So he's asking, is Bielsa involved in Leeds 2023?
Well, Jonathan, I'm afraid, to the best of my knowledge, no. But wouldn't it be a great coup if somehow we could get him involved? And so it's over to Ruth Pitt. Is she still the person who's running the thing? I don't know. Or I was going to say, I think Councillor Lewis, has he left? I'm not sure if he's still there, but he'd be the person to answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we can prod him into trying to approach him. Yeah. I think that's all the questions we have in the Q&A. But you know, I want to thank you again for a fascinating talk, really interesting, and some really, I think, very interesting ideas have come from it too. And if we can, you know, football is becoming a you know, it's kind of a place, a figurehead for you know, fair play, for good conduct, etc., etc. Then that's a wonderful thing. I mean, it's not something that certainly I lived through that Leeds United period that you mentioned, which was not great fun really for many of the fans, I think, who felt that there was this image of Leeds which was really bad. But now it looks much brighter, and you're optimistic, and I'm sure a lot of fans are optimistic. So let's hope for the best. That'd be great.
Can I just show you my T-shirt?
Oh yeah. Oh right. Okay.
So it's Che Guevara with a Leeds United top on. All Leeds, aren't we?
Excellent. Brilliant. Thank you. That's wonderful. We'll have to take a picture of you with that on and put it up on the website somewhere. Well, thanks very much, Anthony. Thanks for sharing those thoughts with us and those memories and the ideas that come from it. And best of luck for you, and best of luck for Leeds United in the future, I guess.
Yes, yes, and I suppose, you know, we're in a very international tournament at the moment, and so you know, one good thing that's come out of it is a Bielsa protege called Calvin Phillips, and let's hope that he sort of does well. You don't have to support England, but I think just like there's a new Leeds, I think there's a kind of New England emerging under Gareth Southgate's fine moral leadership as well. But I'm not, Dave, I'm not getting carried away. There are lots of problems still with football. There's racism, you know, there's sexism, there's, you know, greed and selfishness. I think it's a site of, you know, conflict, of struggle, where progressive ideas are always coming up against bigotry, just like anywhere else. So I don't want to be giving the idea that I'm a deluded fool who thinks that everything is going well. But yeah, I kind of at the moment I feel good, and that's, you know, it's a good feel good sort of thing that we've got going in Leeds.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I think we have to look for the bright spots as well as recognizing that there are some dark ones out there as well.